Hi everyone, Amy here with Amy's Wares, and today I'm going to do some stenciling with metallic watercolor, and I'm going to compare cardstock with watercolor cardstock. Now this is a gorgeous new stencil, part of the October release at A Colorful Life Designs. It's called Fetching Snowflake. You get the inner and the outer portion. I'm just going to use the inner portion with some pixie spray. I have these Kuretake gem color watercolors, and they're metallic, and I have both the Stonehenge black watercolor cardstock as well as some 110-pound black regular cardstock that I got from Michael's. And you can see I die cut those panels down with this really pretty stitched edge. This is a rectangle die from LDRS Creative, and here's a couple photos of the finished cards, but I'm going to walk you through the process using both types of paper to see if we can tell a real difference and see if it works for both types. So I have the pixie spray on the back of this. I'm going to use my brayer to stick it down, and to start I'm actually using the regular cardstock. So this is not meant to be used with a bunch of water. I'm just curious to see if it works, because I know a lot of us might more likely have this on hand rather than the Stonehenge, which isn't the cheapest watercolor paper. So I just wanted to do some trial and error and see if it worked for the masses, to see if you guys can kind of do this technique with what you probably already have on hand. And I have my watercolor brush here, and I'm just kind of putting some water in, and basically I'm just going to watercolor in stripes right over this directly on this cardstock. So I'm trying to not apply too much water. You can see I'm trying to kind of get kind of a thick paste with this watercolor, because I do want it to work like a watercolor, but I don't want to introduce too much water to this cardstock because it's not really intended for that. So I'm just going to go through in rainbow order. I am going to skip the pink, going right from the red to the yellow. They aren't really going to blend together and create like an orange per se, like you would see with like a regular watercolor. These metallic ones tend to function a little bit differently. But so far so good. I'm just kind of working down the rainbow, cleaning my brush a little bit as I go so I don't contaminate the wells with the watercolor in it. But I'm just going to go through and do a stripe of basically each color up to the purple, and then I'm going to repeat the process with the watercolor cardstock. Like I was saying, these are actually two small woman-owned businesses that you can see me utilizing on the screen here. The die cut that I used to cut that pretty stitched edge rectangle is actually called LDRS Creative. It's a small woman-owned business in Michigan. And then the stencil is a small woman-owned business in Texas. I lead the design team for that company. She runs the whole thing herself. She does all the manufacturing, she cuts the stencils, she weeds them, she ships them out. So when you support her business, you're supporting just this lady on her own doing all this tough work to get these gorgeous stencils out into our creative hands. So these snowflakes are some of my absolute favorite in her shop. She has a bunch of different variations, and I absolutely love them, and I always hope every winter or encroaching winter that she's going to create new ones. So here I'm tossing the panel around, but I wanted to show you kind of how it looked, and I'm just going to carefully peel back this stencil to reveal the design. So if you haven't used your watercolors before with stencils, I absolutely encourage you to do so. It's one of my favorites. You might be able to make it work without pixie spray, but I do find that it tends to work a lot better. And you can see this did work. So I didn't really notice any pilling with the amount of water that I used, so it definitely will work with your regular black heavyweight cardstock. Again, this was like the version that you can get from Michael's. So now I didn't actually even apply more pixie spray. I kind of wondered if I was going to have enough residual, but it tends to grab a little bit better to the watercolor, I think, just because of the texture of the watercolor. And now I'm going to do the exact same thing, trying to use the same amount of water. But I can use a little bit more if I wanted to here on this paper because it is intended for that. But I'm going to work through the rainbow, and almost immediately I can tell the difference. So you may not be able to tell without doing it yourself, but you can look here and see just the way that the mica in the pigment is kind of flowing around. You can see automatically that it's a pretty big difference from this cardstock to, the watercolor cardstock to the regular cardstock. You can see it's definitely more intended for this purpose. The watercolor is reacting differently. So it will absolutely work with both, but you'll see here just the texture of the paint when it kind of lies down on the paper. It just looks different. It looks cleaner. The mica seems a little bit more evenly distributed, and it almost seems a little bit brighter to me. I'm not entirely sure how, but there is a notable difference in my opinion. Would I say there's enough that you have to go out and buy this expensive or watercolor paper? Probably not. If you have the black if you have black regular cardstock on hand that's heavyweight and you have these type of watercolor paints, I would say absolutely go for it. If you have pixie spray, bust out your stencils and give it a go. You can see here when I pull it back, I feel like, I don't know, I just feel like the detail is almost there a little bit better. I'm not entirely sure how it looks so different to me, but it really kind of does. I think ultimately it's just the texture of the paper and the way that it reacts to the paint make the difference. You can see it wasn't quite as clean on the other one as well. I don't know if that was the paper or maybe just the way that I painted it, but there would have been an even stronger seal on that first one with the pixie spray. So it absolutely still works. I would definitely recommend it. And you don't even need to do metallic watercolors. You could do this if you have like an inexpensive white watercolor paper, like Canson XL is really not that expensive. You can watercolor with your regular watercolors with your stencils. It's one of my favorite techniques. So I have lots of videos about that if you want to see other ways that I've done this technique. It can be liquid watercolor, it could be watercolor pans, it could be re-inkers, it could be distress ink re-inkers. You could do all sorts of techniques with your stencils if you have the right sort of paper. Now here I have another LDRS creative product. I have this Let It Snow, which I cut out in a holographic and then a black shadow layer, but I don't actually end up using them because I felt like it took up too much or it covered too much of the design. So I'm just going to kind of set those aside for future batching because y'all know I'm going to be making a bunch of Christmas cards. So now I'm kind of playing with other options in terms of sentiment strips and figuring out the right one. And then I land on yet another LDRS creative product here. So these are her sentiment strips. It's really cool. You get like a stamp with a bunch of different sentiments and then a coordinating die that cuts them all out at once. So it's great for batching Betties like me to get a bunch of products kind of ready to go in advance that you can just store away and have ready for future cards. And there's also a shadow layer for that option as well for those dies. So I used two that say Merry Everything. I added some blingage to finish the cards, attached them to a card base. These are US 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And there's my comparison. So you can see I just like the texture better on the watercolor paper. Still pretty on both, but I hope you enjoyed this comparison and you found it helpful. If you did, please hit the thumbs up and consider subscribing. Be sure to check out these women-owned businesses. And if you shop at Colorful Life Designs, use my coupon AmyFan10 and you'll save on your complete order. So thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye.